Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of the ESG Experience podcast, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. Whether you're an ESG expert or just dipping your toes into the ESG universe, this podcast is for you. Together, we navigate the alphabet soup of ESG, share strategies, and discuss industry news and trends. I'm Helee.
And I'm Ryan Nelson. And as the leaders of Conservice's ESG department, we value the importance of telling the real ESG story. Today, we are joined by Dan Winters, Senior Director at GRESB. Our topic today is advancing the real estate investment industry. Dan, welcome. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, and also, what is this GRESB thing? Is it an acronym or not? I always want to know.
Big thanks to the Conservice team for having me today. Dan Winters, Senior Director at GRESB. I've been part of this organization since 2014, really built up the America's effort on ESG and through the investment industry. Been around sustainability for 20 years, and it's been a passion and a pleasure to be part of this industry. GRESB is an acronym. Back in the day when it started, it was started in 2009 by a group of very forward-thinking institutional investors. And it was designed as the original ESG due diligence questionnaire for investors, institutional investors, funds, pension plans, big billion-dollar capital providers, putting capital to work with investment managers that are off buying buildings, investing, making our communities and cities better, hopefully. And so in the 2009 era, ESG was kind of talked about under the idea of sustainability, building by building by building. Some buildings have Energy Star labels, others have LEED certifications. But what was happening at the portfolio level was really the question on the table. So these forward-thinking investment firms hired some academics, and they developed GRESB. Since that time, over the past 12 years, GRESB has really captured mind share globally. And this past year, we had over 1,800 participants in the benchmark. That's 150,000 plus buildings from 70 countries around the world.
That's awesome. I feel like you were just celebrating 1,000, like not too long ago. You're up to 1,800.
Yeah, wow.
With 2000s in sight. Absolutely.
Good for you. I didn't mean to interrupt. That was amazing growth in a short amount of time.
No, it's perfect. Okay, so that's a little bit about GRESB for the folks that are tuned in. We're really, pushing the institutional investment industry forward on the issues of our day and of our time. And now it's moved to climate, it's moved to net zero carbon, net zero portfolios. That's what's on the table.
So, pushing the industry forward, that seems like a big task to take on, something I don't know what the right word is, but ambitious to take that on and say, we're going to go into this industry with this concept and we're going to advance this industry, make it better. I mean, we're almost saying like, hey, we should be doing better, you should be doing better as an industry. So that's kind of a bold, ambitious thing to say. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel pleased and proud that we've been able to put together the network and we have thousands of companies that are part of the GRESB membership group, whether it's the benchmark, whether it's partners like Conservice. Everybody's pushing forward in this direction because it's going to take all of us. It's not going to take just a handful of folks. And there's other initiatives that are happening that are very complementary and helping us all along. There's the Net Asset Owners Alliance and the Net Asset Managers Initiative. $100 trillion over the past 2 years have committed to net zero by 2050 or sooner.
Do you feel like it's still a push? So you say pushing the industry forward, and I've also been in this space for 20 years, and it was a push and an uphill battle and a heavy lift for a while. But now I read headlines like, okay, so here's one. GPs will be required to provide specific ESG-related quantitative data, not only to proactively convey material differentiators, but just to keep fundraising efforts alive. Like, that doesn't feel like a push anymore, right?
It's not. It's really moved, in the whole product adoption curve. You've got the instigators, the spark, if you will, and then you've got early adopters, and then you move into the early mainstream. We're definitely there, if not moving beyond into just mass adoption of ESG principles. Really, what this gets down to are best practices around the globe: good, better, best. And that's what GRESB tries to tease out and identify and point, shine a light on those firms that are implementing best practices and identifying what they are, and then showcasing them so the rest of the industry can see the leaders and move in that direction.
And when do you guys think, as a longtime industry peers, friends, etc., when do you feel like the true inflection point was of when we had to not evangelize this concept anymore and convince people that it mattered, to a point where like you're reading things like just to keep fundraising efforts alive? When was that for you in your mind?
It felt like it was happening at the turn of the decade, 2019, 2020, but then we had the big disruption, the pandemic. And the pandemic really shone a light on the S, the human element, right? So I think that was the big, sort of the big push forward, if you will. And now with enough groups that are part of the benchmark, and some tremendous leadership happening out there, it's pretty easy to define who's doing great, and therefore they're going to get more allocation than the ones that are learning how to spell ESG, if you will. And that's part of the capital raising process. You want to be part of the ones that get the allocation, therefore having some good solid ESG metrics and performance and track record is quite critical to capital raising going forward.
Brian, do you agree? Was the inflection point pre-pandemic for you in your lens?
Yes, I would agree that what Dan said, it started to feel like it was there, and then there was a disruption or a pause, and then 2020 really did, as I've said many times, shined a light on ESG, and like Dan said, social injustice, environmental impacts, health issues, all of those things, governance in the terms of like, do we trust our leadership, and are they monitored appropriately and are making good decisions about how to handle these global issues? And so that all of ESG became on stage in 2020. And so now we're back focused on it. We're so focused, or it's so such a thing that the world is aware of, that now we've got a backlash and fun things to deal with too. And those who are trying to squash ESG. So that's how we know it's real.
Don't let a vocal minority rain on the parade. The momentum is pushing in the direction of progress, and this will go away soon.
I agree. So let me ask you this then, and this is how I kind of believe that that's true. So talk to us. I know you know very well kind of like the whole capital stack and development stack and this whole thing. So I'm, I own, our focus is on the built environment, primarily residential spaces, commercial spaces. And I know GRESB has a bigger scope than just the built environment, which is awesome. But so someone's operating the building, someone's living in a building or using it for some purpose, someone owns the building, someone's making sure that as an asset, it's adding value. Someone gave somebody money so that they could buy the building, and maybe they gave them some money so they could improve the building. So who are all the people who actually cares about the environment? Like someone in there does. So who's driving this at the end of the day?
Well, that's such an interesting observation, where a lot of, if I think back 20 years, right, in the early, as a LEED was launched in 1999, and it was Energy Star 2001, LEED was formally launched. So this was sustainability from the bottom up, right? Some people in a building wanted to do better, whether it was the building engineers or the designers, right? And so this groundswell was happening down below. And so a LEED building would pop up in a portfolio and another one. So what happened in 2009 are these showcase buildings started to show up on the annual reports that made its way all the way up the chain to the big pension plans. So they were looking, they'd see this LEED or the BREEAM or Energy Star building and say, wow, that's great. What are all of our other fund managers doing when it comes to that? And that spark was now the top-down push to meet in the middle. So that's the really big dynamic that's happening here. Ultimately, in the capital stack of a building is a lender with a loan and somebody with equity. On the institutional side, oftentimes that equity will come from overseas. And there are, we're doing a great job here in the US. Canada's doing way better than us. Australia, they're the leaders when it comes to ESG in the GRESB assessment, but the spark came from Europe. And so somewhere in the vast majority of institutional real estate buildings is a European in that capital stack, and they want some metrics, and they're looking for best practice.
And they're investors, right? So they have a company and they need profits, but then like some of the money they're investing, where does that money even come from? They're getting, in some cases, rich people's money, in some cases, retirement funds or something, right? So maybe at the end of the day, it's us as consumers, just normal people walking around, who are the ones that kind of demanding that, we want our money going somewhere that is not bad, to say the least, and ideally is maybe helpful or something. So maybe we're part of it too, I guess, or
we all are. The pension fund perspective, right? If you're a fiduciary of a pension plan, you're responsible for providing for the security of the future for all of those pensioners, teachers, firefighters, policemen. So yeah, it's all about better future, better buildings, better investments. It's not about giving up return. It's about better risk-adjusted returns.
Yeah, and that's what makes me feel good, to your point that, it's not a vocal minority is not gonna, I mean, what we're doing is an obvious thing, finding a sustainable future, mitigating risk for our investments and our retirement, and, a place to live that is not going to be flooded or have insurance rates that are unimaginable, so these are all just things that have to happen, vocal minorities or not.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. I had a one-on-one earlier today with one of our new hires, and they can be scared by it, right? Because you have these nasty headlines like certain states are protecting the elderly from ESG, by way of divesting in these ESG focused funds, right? Because the elderly need to be protected from ESG. But the point that I try to make is like, it's so mainstream now that it has haters, which is awesome. Like, it's a point of contention. It's a topic. It's divisive. It's out there. Whereas if you think like 3, 5, 8, 10, 20 years ago, no one even knew what it was. It was so peripheral and abstract and not critical to what, companies were doing, critical to the operations or a topic in the C-suite. Like now it is, right? So it's only natural that you'll see the backlash.
Those headlines, very quickly, Helee, those headlines, you can just, once you take 2 steps and look behind them, there's somebody that's writing that from an industry that is threatened by change. And this is really what this is. What the world wants to do is count carbon. We want to reduce carbon. We have a carbon problem, 420 parts per million or more now in the atmosphere. We need to reduce that. And the carbon producing industries, well, they're not exactly excited about ESG. That's where those headlines really emanate
or it's
from.
the politicians that have hitched their own story, to being anti-ESG. They're trying to rile up the right people to get the votes that they want. But yes, I agree. It's definitely motivated by a certain, and like we talked about this on another podcast. It's like, if you really break it down, like, and I ask even those people, like, do you want water that's like fresh and clean, or do you want dirty water? Do you want, like, these are basic normal things. Like, do you want your home to be overtaken by a tornado or a flood? Like, it's not like, it's funny to hear like the counter arguments to some of it, right? Unless I suppose they don't believe that that's all interconnected still.
So let's not give it any more life. It's got to fade away. Let's let it natural.
I mean, that's the past, present, future of a thing. We're in a stage where the change is happening. Like you said, we're in the mainstream or whatever. So it is happening, and it's, I don't know if the word's volatile or whatever, but industries, humans are going to have to reimagine their futures, and jobs are changing, and all that stuff's happening. And then, it'll be on to the next thing at some point. But yeah, so that's where we are. Dan, let me ask you, somewhat tongue in cheek, I guess, or for fun, but you always talk about, I heard you say, you can't win ESG, or you can't win sustainability. And I love that. because I get it. It's a wonderful industry. We all help each other out and share so much strategy. But at the same time, I got to think that GRESB, the success of the program, has to be highly connected to the competition that it creates. So you create this amazing field of competition. We know our customers, they want to win this. They want to win. They want to have a great GRESB score, no question about it. And they want to be better than some of their peers and competitors. So how do you say you can't win GRESB if you build a whole system about competing?
Well,
ESG.
So for the folks that are tuned in, GRESB has a 0 to 100 scale. It's an annual assessment. On July 1st is when people submit. On October 1st is when they receive their results. Those firms that score great, it's kind of like getting your SAT back or your spelling test when you were in 7th grade and you get 100. You're like, yes, this is great, when we're celebrating. There's the other ones where you get a score that's not so high, and that hits you viscerally because we've all been trained, kindergarten to graduation. If you get a low score, you're in trouble. And so what I think GRESB has done through this scoring mechanism is and what geeks me out about it are the behavioral economics. It's created a competitive race to the top. People are now pushing for tenths, sometimes hundredths of GRESB points just to keep the momentum moving and moving into the upper right because of that capital raising. You want to be on the list that's the yes list, not the no list. So the behavioral economics are true and they're awesome. And we use that score, of course, and it works.
Yeah, I like it. But obviously you can't win ESG because we all win, I think is your other narrative, right?
I say it out of both, right? You can't win ESG because there is no, okay, if you come in number one in your peer group, great, you're number one in 2022. It's a new year. Well, you got to be number one next year. So you want to like win again. Okay, that means that you need to implement energy audits and renewable energy on your sites and do all of the things. And oh, by the way, now we need net zero targets because GRESB will advance. So it's one thing to say, yeah, I got a 92 last year and that put me number one in my peer group. That 92 might become an 82 the year following if you don't keep up. So can we win? I don't know. We all need to keep pushing and we need those scores to be as high as possible.
So speaking of scores, so I'm pulling some concepts here out of a Harvard University law paper, kind of predicting the trends to come. Dan, you're affiliated with it's your alma mater, right? You went to Harvard.
I wandered around that campus for a year, learned a lot.
Wandered around. That's good. So, okay, your friends at Harvard say ESG scores will increase in influence, but will remain inherently flawed. The capital markets still have not pinpointed a distinct methodology for objectively measuring emissions progress, and for the time being, ESG scores are one of the temporary band-aids attempting to highlight trends. Does that offend you?
No, that's a lawyer talking about things that have nothing to do with economics. What we're really missing is we're missing a price. We're missing a price on carbon. In absence of that, we're looking at other ways. So what GRESB rewards is transparency. Can you acquire the energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emission data for your portfolio? That question was put on the table in 2010 to a lot of really big masters of the universe iBankers, and their heads exploded because they didn't have a process, a procedure, or some software or any tracking to do anything other than track money. Enter a company like Conservice, right? That's your bread and butter, to bring those metrics to fore. We're in the process of trying to elevate those metrics, drive transparency to then determine who is good, better, best when it comes to a portfolio that looks like net zero. We're in the middle of defining what net zero looks like as an industry, so stay tuned. That's what the next 24 months is all about.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's where we wanted to go, was a little bit into the future here. So let's do that. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the history has been about transparency and about reporting. And we know that our customers and people in the industry, their efforts have been in reporting. Like, and it's not, we're not saying report by like convince yourself that you're willing to share it. That's one part of it, but go get it. And it's like, holy cow, that's not easy. You know, go get what? Go get the size of all of your buildings. So that sounds easy. Turns out it's not easy, actually, to even know what size all of the assets I own are, let alone their energy use for 2 straight years and their water consumption and all that stuff. So before, it was a lot about, they've been spending a lot of time operationalizing the ability to get data, put it in the right format, and make use out of it. And I kind of feel like you do really well in GRESB by just doing that. I'm not even sure, and I'd love to hear, but how well do you do by actually performing well, or what does the future of that continue to look like?
Well, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Organizations were relatively dark when it comes to what's your energy spend. Okay, I can figure out my energy spend, but what's my consumption? What are the levers? Can I reduce it? Does it really matter to the NOI? Well, it does, especially if you can focus on it. But if you can't wrap your arms around the data, then you're just kind of flying blind and doing some random acts of sustainability here and there. What GRESB has done, when I look back on a dozen years, is we've basically pushed some discipline into the industry. Wash, rinse, repeat. Do this on an annual basis. Treasure hunt around your organization. Do you have the consumption data? Do you have any policies? Once you have a policy, you tend to implement policies. So all of these things were missing elements that are now required in order to really take the next step forward, this next phase into the performance to meet these net zero commitments that $100 trillion plus of capital is made. So I think we're in good shape, but we definitely needed the last decade to focus on these issues and elevate the transparency. So now we can really get after it.
Yeah, you're right. Now I really, leading back to our theme here, advancing the industry. I mean, no doubt about it. Like you said, it was in the dark. If it hadn't been for GRESB and, a couple of other organizations, we'd be same place we were 10 years ago as far as measurement and the capability to even take the next steps. So yeah, I really do feel like that's happening.
Yeah, agreed.
Energy Star has spiked. The use of the Energy Star building program has spiked.
Yeah.
The LEED certifications for institutional quality real estate has spiked over the duration of GRESB's existence.
And they all feed into each other, right? Because you need the certifications to get the better GRESB score. They all kind of they figure out how to work together, right?
Yep.
You need the Energy Star platform for all the ordinance compliance. It all kind of, it's created. I always talk about it having come up through the industry, it went through an awkward adolescence for a while where it was trying to figure out what it was. And now I feel like it's an adult. There's been some M&A in the space. We kind of know which players do what from the service provider side. And then even from the other organizations we work with, like GRESB, Energy Star, et cetera, they all have a place, know how they work together. So it feels like the awkward adolescence has come to an end.
Well, okay, but we're going to call it freshman, maybe sophomore year in college. Early
for sure. It is not grown. It is an adult because it's 18, but it's not done
there you go.
Changing. Yeah, but it's going to go have a great time in college now.
Well, we all hope so.
Yeah. So, all right, question for you. So you talked about earlier, the craze for carbon. That's definitely the focus we see is these net zero commitments. They're very public too, is the other thing, right? These companies make these commitments, they say they're going to do it, and then someone has to figure out how to do it. And I think that's the holy grail now, is actually tactically breaking that down, figuring out how to do it. We talked about it a lot. Harvard says, water metrics will quickly become an incredibly close second to emissions-related disclosures. Do you agree?
Oh, I've seen Lake Mead. You seen those photos?
Oh my God, it's so sad and scary, right?
I know. We're having an event right now in Northern California that might, add to the reservoirs. But water scarcity is clearly a big, big issue globally. So I totally agree with this.
Okay. Well, yeah,
So,
no arguments there.
So focus on water is in our future. Performance, not just measurement, is in our future. 2050, you mentioned. We've got the commitments via the Paris Agreement. And then I recall that 2030 was kind of a checkpoint on things towards 2050. 2050 is what, about 1,000 years from now? How many years from now is 2030? Anybody know?
7.
Woo, less than 7. That's you can be a procrastinator, but I'm to the point where 7 doesn't sound too far. There better be action if these 2030 commitments, if you're really gonna measure yourself. against them. Is GRESB thinking about that at all specifically, or?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the good news is that we're now seeing a handful of net zero portfolios showing up in our assessment. And it's funny because the leaders that have these portfolios, they're agitated with GRESB because they don't feel like our point scoring and the way that we're set up is giving them adequate credit. So that's interesting because on the one hand, you've got the leaders over here that are agitating, hey, we want you to move faster and do more. On the other hand, we got folks that are just trying to enter the system. What's happening right now is I'm watching a lot of alignment, right? So we've talked about in our time today, the institutional investors at the very top, the buildings at the very bottom, getting the building level certifications, and LEED kind of being GRESB being in the middle with portfolios. Whenever an investment manager like big iBank raises capital and deploys it, they're working with local partners. The big push in 2023, 2024, 2025 is to have the pension plans, the iBanks, and the local partners all get aligned to all have similar targets, not just financial return targets, energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. That alignment is what's the next 2 to 3 years of work.
Brilliant. Man, I wish I could have gotten to Harvard.
Did you try? Did you try?
Sorry, it cut out for a second.
I don't know, like a basketball scholarship or something? No?
Scholarship.
I'll take you to a hockey game someday.
Yeah. That'd be fun.
Oh, Harvard has a hockey team?
Absolutely.
Seems like a rough sport for a bunch of nerds. No, I'm just kidding. I actually read something about how they have the most diverse student base now, like of any of the other Ivies, like by definite like effort to do so, which is kind of cool. It's changed its ways.
It was a fun place to hang out.
Cool. Okay, so how about this one? So there's been a lot of action around the SEC, and that's definitely spurring folks into action, which is great. I think it's a combination of the push from the investors and then the push from the regulation. It's like I say, the push from the top down and the push from the side. I don't know if that's actually where it's coming from, but it all results in the same, thing that we as professionals in this field are looking to see. So, all right, supposedly the SEC will attempt to pass through additional incremental human capital management disclosures. So not just around emissions, but the Working Group of Human Capital Accounting Disclosure asked the Commission to write a rule that would require public companies to give pertinent information to investors so they can assess the extent to which companies invest in their employees. So I've heard a lot of people ask me, like, isn't the S in ESG, isn't that like fluffy? Like that's like the touchy-feely, like, so talk about like, how do you start to put like real KPIs to the S? I mean, something like this is definitely, going to help move the needle, but what are, how do you put like some more tangibility to the S?
It's difficult for sure. I call the S squishy, right? But it is all about people, and people are random variables at times. So the metrics are, some of them are pretty straightforward. You want equal pay for equal work, right? So no difference between male and female. That you'd like some balanced boards. So not having a dominant culture within a board, having other reference points come in to key decisions, right? So those are things that you can track. And I think that if they're tracked in a uniform way, transparently, and disclosed transparently, what's the word I'm looking for? In a framework that's very consistent, then over time, the academic researchers will jump in and say, okay, well, this is what we're now seeing. The firms that have these characteristics tend to have financial outperformance. And that's what the industry needs, but you need to invent the future. And the only way you can do that is by having consistency on the metrics that are being reported and actually having them be reported. So, which exact ones? I think we're all going to continue to figure that out. More work to do.
Yeah, that reminds me, I'll take one more jump to the past here. When I think we were all on a somewhat similar journey in 2009, 2010, and we were looking for that key thing to be able to, because we were doing a lot of evangelizing on why you should LEED certify a building, for example, why you should go green. And then all of a sudden, I think it was CBRE put out a long research paper that actually showed like an increase in value of one building because of the green things they did. And then like that worked for like 5 years. We were able to reference that one research paper that they had enough information to figure out that in this case that the investment was more valuable. And it was been referenced. I'm like, can't we write a new one at this point? But yeah, it was referenced for like the next 5 years of us selling and supporting LEED certifications.
Well, so around that era, there was an event that happened in Washington, D.C. as part of I believe it was the 2012 Defense Authorization Act. The National Academies of Sciences was engaged to do a review of the green building rating systems to determine if they were a good investment for the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
The ultimate output from their year-long effort was that the preponderance of the evidence shows that green building rating systems are a net positive for investment for the taxpayer, right? So what they did is they looked at not only that CBRE report, but a mound of other evidence out there. And they found that, there were a lot of papers that said, yep, this shows that it worked for us, this worked for us, this is true, but not all of them, right? But the preponderance of the evidence shows the direction of ESG and all these metrics lead to better outcomes, good investment for the taxpayer.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate all the thoughts about all the parties involved, from researchers and the analysts that put together the information, the instigators or instigators as you call them, and the innovators that try this before we have all of that information, and then it gets validated. So yeah, what a journey it's been to get here and through 2020 and on the other side of that. So that's very cool. You mentioned DC. I'm going to move us along here to our game for the day and see how well you actually know DC. So I have one question for you, Dan. I'm going to name a place. It's in DuPont Circle neighborhood. Do you know this neighborhood?
I'm aware of it, yes.
Okay. DuPont, it's a historic neighborhood in DC there. And this place is called Emissary. All you have to do is tell me whether they brew coffee, beer, or both. So you've got like a 33% chance. The Emissary.
I'm going to go with beer.
They do, but they also brew coffee. So I have to say that you're wrong this time.
Well, the good news, Ryan, is I live in Arlington, Virginia, and I am going to go down to the Emissary because it's likely 6 to 7 miles away from my house, and I'm going to get myself a coffee and a beer.
Well, do it, because this is why we wanted to highlight this one, as we always put someone on point here. Their message is that they believe in community, diversity, and equality. They are a space for people of all backgrounds and beliefs to unwind and connect over carefully sourced and organic ingredients for counterculture, coffee, local craft beer, wine, and brilliant cocktails. So yes, check out the Emissary, Dan, when you're out there, and thanks for playing our game.
Thank you.
And don't feel bad. Before we had guests, before our podcast gained in popularity, we had hundreds of thousands of listeners when we were just, growing nascent. I had to play the game, and I almost never won. So Ryan would ask me, then I would ask Ryan, and I almost always got it wrong. So don't feel bad. That's my point.
Don't worry. You
can't
win ESG, and you can't win the Conservice game.
You can't win the podcast game. Cool. Well, it's been fun. This has been another episode of the ESG Experience podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed your time with us, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. There's a new episode every month. We appreciate our loyal subscribers for continuing to support our podcast. And if you do want to continue the conversation between episodes, please follow us on your favorite social media channel at #ESG Experience. And Dan, thank you.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Dan. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.